This plush office houses South African Airways' Florida-Miami sales office that employs 75% of the total SAA staff in the United States, all of whom are American nationals. SAA shells out an average of 65,000 rands for every single employee working out of this building. But there's a slight hitch. SAA does not operate a flight into Miami.
An internal audit has never been performed on an audit of this outstation.
The money for SAA, we used Section 16 of the PFMA, which requires that on an emergency basis, given certain conditions which may have a negative impact on the fiscus, we may take, and the economy, we may take certain, the Minister of Finance is empowered to take certain action.
We are relying on lenders to finance our working capital requirement, and that is not a good place to be.
We say again, SAA is making money. Flights are full. And we say again, SAA is profitable. We can't run away from that. But what we know is that SAA money is walking out the door. And someone must be held accountable.
Our next meeting with the SAA, we will ask them, the board, what is the progress in respect of the allegations of corruption within the SAA?
And it's time that the issues around corruption at SAA be addressed.
Ernst & Young report, ENS report point at certain things that will shock the public. The money that was spent, for me, it was better that we spent that money because we now know what causes the South African Airways to be in bad financial position, and that can be changed.
Treasury must hold the SAA to account, and our view is they're failing to do so. Treasury certainly has to do far more, and our job as the committee is to hold them to account.
We don't have crisis. Crisis is created.
Hello and welcome to part 2 of our continued coverage of the dire state of affairs at South African Airways. Finance Minister Malusi Gigaba handed out a 2.3 billion rand guarantee to SAA, much to everyone's dismay. Now, Parliament's Finance Standing Committee chairperson says SAA's plight is a failure on Treasury's part. And as everyone is busy passing the buck, ANN7 reveals the shocking loot that is being overlooked by all and sundry.
Morning in New York City.
Welcome to the Grand Hyatt Flushing Hotel. Just 12 minutes from JFK International Airport, this hotel offers a plush accommodation, an indoor pool, fitness center, spacious rooms, but its obvious charms fail to appeal to the SAA aircrew.
SAA's pampered pilots and cabin crew refused to even inspect this hotel. This, despite it ticking all the boxes. According to a forensic audit report by ENS, they instead chose a hotel which ultimately cost SAA 25 million rand extra.
as the staff wanted something even more lavish and in the hub of the city. As Dudu Myeni gets vilified, it is clear that no expense is spared when austerity is needed. Bad management practices rule. The ENS report shows, for example, sheer tardiness in renewing a contract for the Western Grand Hotel, which cost SAA approximately 732,000 rands. Sadly, fancy hotels are only part of the story of SAA's pampered pilots. For pilots whose productivity is significantly lower than industry norms, their salaries and benefits are almost the best in the world. SAA has 754 pilots, 9.5% of the total staff. 2015-2016 salary cost for the pilots was about 1.8 billion rands. Pilot salaries equal 34% of the total salary bill of 5.4 billion rands. An SAA pilot's average salary in US dollars, $182,038, is 22% higher than African wage. Only pilots from the Americas earn more than SAA's pilots. Flight crew have ironclad contracts, which means little or nothing can be done about the exorbitant costs.
Where there's a whole debacle about how much the pilots get paid, and that there are the second highest paid pilots outside of the Americas in the world. And why is that if we're talking about a company that is sitting with an accumulated loss of just under 26 billion? Why do we have those problems?
The board members, handpicked by the then Finance Minister Pravin Gordhan, have since presided over 2 bailouts, and nearly a year later, the airline still does not have a permanent chief executive. Meanwhile, under their watch, the airline continues to bleed. Its pilots and cabin crew are not bothered in the least, with SAA spending 290 million rands on their travel and accommodation each year, something the auditors describe as excessive and unreasonable benefits. At 51 million rands, New York is the most expensive destination for SAA. SAA requires about 13,140 rooms per year at an average rate of 4,000 rands per room. Cabin and flight deck crew stay at separate hotels. This despite the policy that both should stay in the same hotel in order to benefit on transport and avail bulk discounts. Cabin crew chose a hotel that cost SAA an extra 18.5 million rands. Flight deck crew chose a hotel which cost SAA an extra 6 million rands. SAA ended up spending 24.5 million rands extra over 2 years. But who is to blame for the ongoing splurge? The opposition and media is quick to point fingers at SAA board chair, conveniently ignoring the other role players: the Treasury, the SAA board and its unstable management.
I keep getting vilified for sins I've not committed. And today it is put under my doorstep that I've put SAA into bad financial position.
Part of the problem for the poor performance of SAA relates to legacy issues, issues that SAA failed to deal with before Ms. Myeni was appointed.
The stark reality of SAA is that it now has more than 21.4 billion rands in guarantees from the government to survive, and a bunch of promises.
The new board members have got a good grip on the airline and the business of the airline, and we're optimistic that if we do the right things and they do the right things and find the new CEO and CFO in the course of the next few months, there are good prospects for SAA being turned around.
The SAA board has been reconstructed, who are working together with Ms. Dudu Myeni and they are trying against very, very difficult odds to reposition SAA.
I think I have confidence in the board collectively, in their collective ability to focus on the task at hand, implement the recommendations that will be made.
Depressingly, ENS's projection of a potential saving of 964.4 million rands seems a pipe dream.
I'm hoping that ultimately we shall be maybe instructed, or the board will decide to instruct the management to implement the recommendations. The purpose really was very, very important to commission those investigations. The money that was spent, for me, it was better that we spent that money, because we now know what causes the South African Airways to be in bad financial position, and that can be changed.
And joining us in studio is Cecilia Russell, editor for special projects at ANN7, Adil Nchabileng as Transform RSA president, Matthew Ramos is South African Transport and Allied Workers Union National Sector Coordinator for Aviation, and Zamo Madlala is the spokesperson for Black Empowerment Foundation. Thanks so much for joining us, especially for part 2 of this expose. It just seems to be getting worse by the day. It is a cash cow. The rampant looting that's happening at SAA is almost synonymous with the airline now, not necessarily as a national carrier. Cecilia, just give us the background in terms of this particular story of how SAA is bleeding money.
The ENS report deals with, many cases, and some of them are worse than others and what have you. This particular case we chose because it just shows with a slow drip of money out of SAA, with almost nobody willing to come to the party. So by just choosing one hotel cheaper, closer to the airport, they could cut down their costs in terms of transport and hotel considerably. This is the story of SAA. I think that, as I said, we were trying to find stories that illustrate how it is that that money is just disappearing. I mean, they might as well be filling up the aircraft with fuel, but not putting the fuel tank into the right space. So it's that kind of feeling that you get when you read this report.
Yeah, but what is the union's role, though? Because you're also supposed to have an oversight function when it comes to dealing with wasteful expenditure. There's a role that you can play to help the airline save a buck or two.
Thanks. Look, we've been seeing that in terms of the cost, especially when the cabin crew or the pilots are going outside the country, it's too much, and SAA should find a way to make sure that they cut the costs, in particular how they pay the pilots and the benefits that we, in our view, as SATA, that some of these benefits are unnecessary. Because if you look at this report, it will tell you that if SAA can do a certain cost in terms of these benefits, it can almost, have almost R1 billion a year as a savings, which shows that it's R1 billion that is wasteful.
Yeah, but the point is that the representatives, as yourself and SAPA, will represent the pilots, negotiate certain deals or even what is acceptable by your members, i.e. cabin crew or the pilots. So where does it go wrong, though, where the prices are inflated for an airline that is very poor, or rather is dysfunctional and cannot afford it?
You need to separate the two, Cindy, that the pilots are only represented by SAPA, and they are doing everything individually. They don't include everybody else. Then there will be a cabin crew where the organization like your SACA will be part of it. However, everything is not going to be the same. You'll see that the cabin crews will fight for the opportunity to go to sleep to a better hotel, simply because they will always be divided with pilots. They will all fly to a certain destination, but when they reach that destination, they will be separated. Pilots will go to a different hotel. Same applies with cabin crews, which...
So there's an issue of envy here. So now, the cabin crew will then want to match whatever the pilots
That's exactly, because it says, look, in terms of, we are all employees of SAA, why do you discriminate? Why others should sleep somewhere else better compared to us? Yeah. I think that's where it creates a whole tension and outcry.
Adil, how do you interpret what's going on at SAA?
Look, SAA, in the situation that it finds itself, is actually quite astonishing. Here you have an airline which is an airline run like any other business, unfortunately it's owned by the state. So you have a situation whereby this airline is bleeding money year on year, and yet it's making money to survive. It's a bloody contrast. I mean, if you look at the whole situation itself as to what is happening within SAA, I mean, 1.5 billion is trapped abroad, which is money that should have actually got into the coffers of SAA and helped in terms of improve the revenue and the financial performance of the company, but that money never comes back into the company. You have contracts that do not make sense, that are actually structured within SAA, that are only benefiting a sector and a segment of the society. Let's go back to the issue of black economic empowerment. SAA spends 24 of its budget, of its revenue, 24 billion, on no one else but a specific amount of white companies, which in this case is what we refer as white monopoly capital, and they are the only companies that benefit out of this particular spend. And the reason why SAA is bleeding money is because the companies that are actually contracting services, that are providing technology, that are actually providing air flight carriers and services, are taking more money out of the airline than there is to be saved and actually produce profitability for SAA.
Yeah. Is it a case of illegality where the tenders may be rigged or preferential treatment for certain companies, as you're saying, or just simply the lack of day-to-day basic management ability in the airline, Zamo?
Okay. As a Black Empowerment Foundation, since the last show on SAA, what we then went and did is that we went and just purely studied the actual annual reports of SAA, which are public. And within those very reports, within the director's report, you find stories almost on a yearly basis. I'll give you an example. In 2009, in the director's report, it is said that the former CEO at the time, Dr. Kayamula, left under a cloud. They actually put it in the report that there's a forensic investigation because there's suspected fraud and corruption, and the fact that he has left does not mean that they cannot take action against him retrospectively. But no action was ever taken. And since then, it has just followed. And the board has instituted many forensic reports. Obviously, they can't be discussed because they've never actually published them publicly, so we are not aware of them, although one may have had sight of them. You can't really articulate it here for the fear of being sued. But the actual annual reports do show the gross mismanagement. I believe in the insert, the former finance minister, Pravin Gordhan, was suggesting that the current board has come to grips with the airline. They know what's going on. They were appointed on the 1st of September 2016. It's the 19th of July 2017. You still sit with an acting CEO, Musa Zwane, who's part of the long line of people that have been acting over the last 5-6 years. I think he's about CEO number 6. So who's got grips of what, really? So.
Yeah. But I think in the midst of the chaos, there's clearly some that are benefiting and that have made their livelihood or even built empires on what's going on at SAA. But we continue with the discussion focusing on the pilots, and they're seemingly overruling authorities to decide where they want to stay, and this is just part of the story. The national carriers' underperforming pilots are pampering themselves in many other ways. And it's over to my colleague Stephanie van Vieren for more.
Thank you so much, Cindy. Well, the ENS report says that the pilots' benefits is excessive and unreasonable. And let's take a quick look at those benefits. We do know that the pilots represent 9.5% of the SAA staff, but they are paid 34% of the total salary cost, and just 754 pilots cost SAA a 1.8 billion rand per year, drastically more expensive than the peers. SAA pilots are 20% less productive than the industry norm. A 10% increase in productivity reduced overtime would save 194 million rand. At least 80% of SAA pilots are white. And this is how much SAA could save if they would just renegotiate the contracts. Well, salary adjustment could save them 200 178 million rand. Productivity improvement could save them 194 million rand. The travel benefit could save them 185 million rand. Reduction of leave liability could save them 153 million rand, and leaves and allowances 159 million rand. That will bring the total savings to 964 million rand. It's back to you, Cindy.
Thanks so much, Stefani. Cecilia, just in terms of what they can do within the immediate, renegotiating salary packages, adjusting the inflated cost that they're paying towards the pilots. I mean, 34% of the entire spend of the airline goes for salaries with the pilots. Is this something that can be done without, of course, the litigation that the pilots, I'm sure, would put up?
I believe that they have a very, very good contract, you know, that they're almost watertight for them. So, but I also understand that if you are a company or any company in this country and you fairly go around restructuring, they would be able to restructure. If they restructured the whole thing, they would be able to renegotiate those packages. The problem is that you know, the Pilots Association is very strong. You know, it is very strong, and they're not really willing. Obviously, why would you be willing to change anything? Which is also a very odd thing, because, you know, this is the national carrier. This is an airline in trouble. This is an airline that's getting, well, people refer to as bailouts, but in actual fact, they're not bailouts, because they're loans. They're loans from government. They have to be paid back at some stage. It's not a bailout or a handout. It's actually going to keep them, you know, tied to a debt situation for many, many years, more than 21 billion at the moment. So, you know, it's time, you know, that management then took a very clear and clear look at what you can do.
Adia, but is the onus, though, to try and save the airline based rather on the crew or the pilots, or should there be a better management of the carrier?
Both should apply. One, it starts with management, and then the reviewing of existing contracts and agreements. You cannot have evergreen agreements that are actually structured for the South African Pilots Association that only benefits a sector within the employment of SAA, particularly within the air crew as well as the pilots. Here you have a situation where one pilot on average receives 2.3 million rands annually as just an average salary. So if you have a pilot who has been working in SSA, let's assume 15 years, that pilot by now should be sitting at 10+ million annually in terms of a salary or a particular package. So this is not a fair process by which you have a group of pilots who are dominating in terms of the spend of the airline and who are not interested in reducing or even accommodating the airline's challenges, particularly on the issue of sustainability. Then you come back, you have a situation whereby the air crew is treated differently from the pilots, who are the same staff on a particular airplane. But where does this come from? The pilots come from a basis whereby these were individuals who used to be in the previous apartheid regime, who were in the then military, South African military. When the military was collapsed, they then moved from the military as pilots in the military and then joined the private airlines. And this happened to be SAA and a couple of other pilots, other airline industries. So you are now looking at a situation of reverse apartheid and discrimination applied in the airline industry, whereby you have certain benefits only which applies for a particular sector, which is mainly black people, and then you have benefits that apply for the majority of white people within SAA, and there's no meeting in between.
But this imbalance, though, because clearly the pilots, we've seen them, the backlash towards the chairperson, Dudumieni, when she wanted to renegotiate their packages, saying that they've entrenched themselves in such a way that they're bleeding the airline, essentially, of money. How do you dislodge, if you will, this kind of stranglehold that the pilots have on the airline? Matthew.
Our position to the board of SAA was very clear, Sato, to say, look, we can't allow pilots to hold this country at ransom when they see that the airline is bleeding, but they are not willing to negotiate. I remember sometimes back, Emirates did the same thing when it grounded all the airline, all its aircrafts, when the pilots wanted to go on strike because they didn't want to compromise. I think SAA, that's a route that they should have taken, or they should take in making sure that they are saving a lot of money in terms of these pilots. And there are so many pilots who are willing to join SAA. You look at British Airways, for an example. Some of them, they are not even earning half of what SAA pilots are, and are willing to come on board to be pilots of SAA. We've got young South African pilots, blacks, who are willing to come on board, who qualifies to be pilots. And now they are gategating and they can't come in because these pilots decided to close. So I think the shareholder itself, because this is above the management of SAA, or including the board, because the pilots of SAA, they report directly to the minister. They don't listen to anybody else. That's why they try to campaign to disrespect the chairperson of the board when she wanted to engage on these things. So I think that is the route that SAA should take, in particular.
And Cindy, just to add on that, how do you have a situation whereby an airline has majority of its pilots not staying in South Africa, who continuously have to be flown in from various destinations in order to come and work in South Africa? You have people stationed in Mauritius, you have people stationed across the world, and every time that the airline must operate, it must first go and fetch its workers on a different destination, bring them back into a current destination, which is South Africa. From there, then pay for the amount to now transport the people on board. It's most unfair. You have a situation where the Evergreen Agreement says that girlfriends, spouses, and all the people who received benefits, as long as you were registered, once registered as a beneficiary, for a pilot beneficiary, whether it's for tickets, whether it's to get destinations for free, those benefits actually accrue to you as an individual. Whether you're still involved with that pilot or you have long left that relationship, you still accrue the benefits for a lifetime. That is why they call it an Evergreen Agreement. And nobody wants to question these issues.
So even spousal benefits, let alone having the luxury holiday homes across the world and insisting on a lavish lifestyle while you're working, mind you, 20% less productivity at that rate, and yet they insist annually on even more money. So why has Treasury, nobody, the board, not done anything about this, Samo?
Well, that's why we are saying that it's quite clear. It's failure in management. The employer-employee relationship is managed by the employer and the employee. Anything is open to renegotiate. Currently, we're hearing of all the various retrenchments that are happening across the country. So it can't be that someone is telling me that there is no way of renegotiating the contract. But when you really go to the heart of the matter, is that all of the debacles around SAA go back to it having been moved from Transnet, moved to public enterprises, from public enterprises, now it's been moved to Treasury. There is no clear strategy, firstly, from the shareholder. When there's no clear strategy from the shareholder, whoever then gets appointed to the board, which we actually see as a washing machine, because you go in for your wash and you come out and then other people go in. That is what's literally happening. It's a washing machine between the executives, the board. Now we are made to believe that Dudumieni has brought about the current debacle at SAA. And when you look at it, I mean, SAA sits with an accumulated loss of 25 billion, in excess of 25 billion, as per last year's financial statements. Given now that the new finance minister has given another 2.3 billion, not bailout, it's a guarantee. Meaning you must go and borrow money yourself.
Almost like collateral, if you like.
Yes, with a weakened balance sheet. We've now been downgraded.
And it's the last resort. We told, that nothing else could have been done. Otherwise, they would have had to close shop.
Again, you must understand there's a strategy behind why SAA is bleeding money. The intention is to privatize, eventually privatize SAA and sell it off as a national asset into private hands. There's a group in South Africa that is adamant. And this particular group happens to be a class of politicians who feel that they want a piece and share of the cake of South African public assets. As a result, they are pushing for privatization of particular state entities and assets that they know are profit-making. As long as they can take them out of the state, they can then turn them around and then push them into a profit-making situation. So SAA's money crisis as well as management crisis is a created process.
All right, we'll explore that theory a little bit, in a bit rather. Now, the situation does get worse with South African Airways currently losing 370 million rand a month, and the board refuses to discuss, let alone implement recommendations that could save the airline billions.
Company, Rishebile Aviation and Protection Services. job, responsible for SAA ground security. Paid 383 million rands over 56 months without a contract. Reshebile means we're watching you, a particularly pertinent name for a security company. RAPS, as the company is popularly referred to, is the service provider contracted to SAA to manage physical ground and aviation security. But for as long as 56 months, it was operating without a contract. For 56 months, SAA was paying RAPS almost 7 million per month without proper documentation. In the absence of a contract, if RAPS failed to do its job, SAA could not have held them to account, and it would get away without paying a single penny in penalties.
Nearly 4 months ago, 200 million in foreign currency was stolen at the OR Tambo International Airport, making it one of the most audacious cash heists in South Africa. Allegations of police corruption also have come to the fore. The security responsible for controlling access are Reshebile Aviation Service Security, a company that did not have a contract with SAA for 4.5 years. Had the incident happened in January 2011 to August 2015, SAA would not have been able to bring the company to book.
Let's first understand the antecedents of this contract. RAPS was initially awarded a contract for aviation security in 2008. The 3-year contract expired in 2011. A tender process was initialized in 2012, but cancelled due to change of scope and specification. A new tender process initiated in 2014, 2 years later. In the meantime, RAPS' contract was extended 8 times. During these extensions, RAPS was paid 383 million rands. The tender process finally concluded in August 2015 and again awarded to RAPS.
RAPS is a joint venture between Zonke Zizwe Security and KwaZulu-Natal Security. In 2003, it won a lucrative contract with SAA. 4 years later, SAA changed the scope, requiring one security service provider to assist in all of its security areas. RAPS was a successful bidder, leaving RAPS the only company responsible for screening SAA Airways personnel.
Well, let's take a look at some of the irregularities in the Reshebile contract. Well, first of all, 169 million was paid irregularly. We can also know that the processes relating to RAPS, the tender took 56 months to finalize. The contract was extended 8 times and inconsistent with established SCM processes. No document was there to support extensions from December the 1st, 2014 to May the 15th, 2015. 30 million rand was paid during this time and classified as irregular. A no signed contract between October the 1st, 2015, February the 20th, 2017. 129 million rand was paid during this time, classified as irregular. The latest contract given on August 2015, but underway until December the 1st, 2016. The contract still is not signed till February 2017, when it was expiring on March the 31st, 2017. A contract awarded for 18 months was still not finalized after 17 months. The HOD Group Security Services struggling to enforce penalties against RAPS as they refuse to pay or implement corrective action in absence of a signed contract.
The current RAPS contract was slated to end March 31st, 2017, yet tender processes were not initiated until February 2017, meaning that the current contract, despite all the irregularities and oversights, will be extended again till the new tender process is initiated and concluded.
Now, continuing the discussion on the loot in SAA, it seems that the environment itself is conducive to benefit a few, and giving impetus to what you were saying, Adil, that there is a concerted effort to devalue the airline or the assets thereof so that it can be privatized. What is your view on that?
Me? It does seem as though, we were talking in the break, 32 of the contracts are irregular in some way or another. Either there are no contract signed, or they're done on a month-to-month basis, or they're done on on some sort of agreement. Whether this is all aimed to privatize, I don't know. My impression is, having gone through all of these things and not been at all an expert, is that it's very little to privatize in SAA, the truth be told. I mean, they seem to not own anything, not even the toothpicks, that they give, passengers. So everything seems to be on contract, or even their planes. It's a very small fleet that is actually owned by them, etc., etc. So I think it may be already.
But I mean, it's got the potential. I mean, if you get the right turnaround strategy, the right team, it could be run properly and be profitable. Yes. But the thing is, at the moment, clearly, even if it's not worth much, as you're saying, that somehow it is benefiting a few companies, and lucratively so.
Well, it benefits a lot of companies, and extremely lucratively. The only company that's not benefiting, or if you put it that way, or the state-owned company that's not benefiting, is SAA. They're leasing planes. They are buying ready-made food. They're paying their pilots too much. They are having contracts that are never fulfilled. So there seems to be a great deal of issues around their contracts.
Yeah, but I mean, it's so brazen. Daylight robbery, where unsigned contracts are just left like that, leading to a loss of 1 million rand a month. I mean, it's not something, it's not small change, petty cash that has just gone missing from the receptionist's desk. This is serious money, and that's perpetually happening, Matthew.
That's a high level of saga, because you ask yourself that, but how did one authorize a payment without a legal document that obliges to say how much you should pay a month and to receive a service? And it seems like it's a norm where now it's been a culture to say, look, let's pay, and we'll see it later. How you pay it, then we'll see it later. That is a norm with SAA management, and it's been taking so long. It's been years that they are used to this payment without a formal contract being signed. And it seems that the shareholder is not even bothered.
But the level of lack of governance and basic principles of Public Finance Management Act, applying even, rudimentary processes of, as you are saying, a contract must be signed, an invoice received, evaluate if the work has been done, and then monies are transferred. But in this case, it's not happening, Zamo.
I'd actually like to approach it from the other side, which says SAA was moved from public enterprises in 2014, if I'm not mistaken, to Treasury. And the whole reason was to ensure that the long-term turnaround strategy can be implemented, all the wonderful talk. But the reality is that when you analyze the actual financial statements, you find that as of 2013, SAA's total liabilities exceed its total assets. It's still the current position. It's just that the picture has just become worse and worse and worse and worse. Hence, you now sit with more than 21 billion in guarantees from government. There is no, what you're literally doing at SAA, you're taking someone with a broken leg and you're constantly giving them crutches, hoping they will heal. SAA, since I believe it's the early 2000s, the directors have been writing, we are undercapitalized. Now, if every annual report is saying that, and constantly when time comes to assist, you're providing a guarantee to somebody who's too weak to do anything about it.
So you're saying Treasury is enabling SAA as a book?
Treasury is allowing the looting to continue unabated. I mean, the former finance minister was saying that the current board has got the matter to grips. The current board did not pitch up to Parliament for a finance portfolio committee meeting, all of them except the chair.
All right, we'll ventilate that in a little bit. And now 705 million rand has been classified as irregular expenditure by the ENS report, and money that was wasted due to processes not being followed. But on whose doorstep does the blame lie? Is SAA chairperson and the board the only ones not doing their jobs?
While everybody is blaming SAA chair for its woes, here's how Treasury failed in its oversight role. SAA was put under Treasury's administration in December of 2014. Treasury engages with SAA on a weekly, a monthly and a quarterly basis. Meetings attended by higher levels of management discuss SAA's financial performance. Treasury has failed to provide forensic investigation reports into SAA to Parliament's Finance Committee. The Deputy Finance Minister, Sifiso Buthelezi, promised to release forensic reports in May, which he still has not done. And he also absented himself from the last Finance Committee meet, and none of the board members were present at the last Financial Committee meet.
Thanks so much, Stefani. Just continuing on the Treasury's responsibility now that this is under their administration. And again, it's been a perennial problem with the SAA not being able to balance their books, as it were.
Yeah. The issue within SAA, it's traced back to various years of mal and misadministration. Let's take a simple example. If this matter of SAA's performance and mismanagement was related to key political personalities. For instance, if Zuma had a hand in the current situation in SAA, this matter would have long been looked into. Now that because there is nothing that traces either Zuma nor the Guptas into SAA, suddenly this matter is shoved beneath the table. Nobody wants to talk about it. Even the portfolio in Parliament is not even...
Well, Julius Malema did try to link the chairperson to Zuma, so I don't know if...
But the chairperson is there in an official capacity. And she's the problem, by the way, because the chairperson, Dudu Myeni, is the one who's calling the trump card on the issue of corruption within SAA. She's the one who says there's only 98% spend towards white companies and only 2% is given towards triple BEE. So she is a problem because she's called on some of these issues. She's commissioned reports such as the ENS report, the Ernst & Young report, and all of the particular forensic reports. So she will definitely be implicated in this situation. But let's be fair. Treasury has done the most fantastic work mismanaging the turnaround of SAA, to the point where they even called Bain, the same company that was linked to the former CEO of SAA, who actually bled SAA. They called the same company that he owns to come and do a turnaround in this current year that we're talking about. So how do we come back and say now the management is related to management internally when the issues are sitting with, one, the shareholder, and secondly, on this other side, the people who are beneficiaries in SAA?
Yeah. Cecilia, there's a response from SAA. They were invited for this debate and obviously declined.
For comment on our stories, extensive comment, and they said that they said if there was any wrongdoing, that they would certainly act against that wrongdoing. I think that's fair to say that. They said that they felt that these reports were not complete, therefore they can't be out in the public domain. However, I'm disinclined to agree with that because they may be incomplete, but they had enough time to complete. The one was finished last year, the other one was finished earlier this year. They should have been put to the board. The board should have said, well, we need to get this finalized, etc., etc. We need to move on this. It's not only, these are only two of a whole range of other reports. Remember in the last series we spoke about 90 million rands worth of reports that have been done. So the Treasury and Treasury, in terms of its report, when you ask questions, they say it's SAA. SAA must answer. So, but I think that there's a change in the narrative in the parliamentary committee because the chairman of the parliamentary committee said clearly Treasury is failing in their oversight. And I think that maybe at last people are actually understanding that everybody, actually I think that at every level there's a failure. But Treasury that meets with them daily, weekly or whatever, weekly and monthly and what have you, and takes and is in charge, actually, effectively in charge.
But do you need a special ceremony, though, to present a report that has been compiled on a case that is so glaring? We've had this since time and immemorial. What does it take? What is the protocol of now having to have the executive respond and then to get a stamp and then move on? Is it just deliberate again to just perpetuate the situation?
I think that You know, I think it is actually, but maybe I'm wrong. But and they say that there's, you know, there was perhaps, according to some people that we've spoken to on the board, they say, oh no, you know, they weren't fully paid, and so they have been unable to finish it. But the fact of the matter, if you have a will, if you have seen the contents of this report, and you've said, this is ghastly, these are the 10 things we can do to fix immediately, and these are the 5 things that we can do that'll fix over the next year, and this is what we can renegotiate, and we must make sure that our supply chain management is up to speed, etc., etc. You would make it a priority. If you know that there's 2 billion, more than 2 billion to be saved because you implement these the findings of these 2 reports, then what is it?
But why isn't there a sense of urgency, though?
Well, actually, to add to what Cecilia said, amongst the reports that are currently there, and I believe the DA has given the minister 5 days to respond and to make the reports public. One of the recommendations speaks of the Audi Uttaram Partem rule, which says you must provide an opportunity to those who are implicated to submit possible explanations of their conduct. But now, within that recommendation, there's an added, which says SAA would be within its right to suspend the said employees whilst providing them the opportunity to respond and explain their conduct. So for the board to literally hide behind the fact that these reports are not final, they haven't provided people the opportunity to respond, in the actual reports they are given 2 ways of handling them. That yes, you can either sit with them and provide them the opportunity to respond, or actually suspend them and provide them the same opportunity. Because these things have been investigated forensically. People are named that so-and-so did this, did that, did this, did that. And therefore this company got a contract. This company misled the committee and could have committed fraud by misrepresenting this fact, that fact, that fact. And in fact, there's a recommendation that says these matters should be reported to SABS and investigated. So,
no, but nobody's going to implicate themselves, and if you're saying that there is that safety net where they can protect themselves and not necessarily expose the corruption that is going on there, who would want to incriminate themselves?
Exactly.
I don't think they would incriminate themselves. I think that they would be given an opportunity to respond. But I think you're absolutely right. I think that one of the reports says clearly that if you know that there's a crime that's been committed, and I don't think that in either of these 2 cases today is about criminality, it's about mismanagement, about ignoring public finance protocols, etc., etc. But when you know that there's that criminality has happened, you are required to report it. You're required to go and lay a charge. I think that the lesson of this year and all the stories you know, where people are going to lay charges all the time is that you know that this is. To know that this is continuing or allowing it to continue, even though it's in a report, is unacceptable.
Why the lack of urgency in your view from Satal?
Look, thanks, Cindy. You know, I think we need to be honest to the public and to the South Africans, including workers, and be open and honest about this issue. And I don't think SAA is correct by saying that some of these reports are like draft agreements or draft reports and so forth. They are final reports, which even ourselves as SATA, we are willing to give it to the public so that the public can see how the money is being misused. You know, we look at the Open Waters report. It even recommends the immediate suspension of individuals who misconducted themselves in terms of the process, but management is doing nothing. You look at these reports, they've been having these reports from the 31st of March, some of them, but they are doing nothing about them. They're saying, no, but look, we are still going to finalize. What is it that you are finalizing? Who instigated this investigation in the first place? What was the purpose? SAA spent millions to instigate these reports simply because the board, the previous board, wanted to understand exactly why SAA is losing money. Now that there's reports, different reports pointing to one thing, then they are saying, no, but we are still investigating. It's a waste of time, and they are misleading the public. And we as SATA, we are willing to even publicize. If the public want to see, including the parliament, if they don't want to submit, we'll send copies of those reports so that they can see how SAA is losing money.
Yeah, more active citizen participation, clearly, because nobody is willing to do anything.
Look, from a Transform RSS point of view, we've been involved from the day one. The story of SAA was not an accident. We got into SAA, we did huge inquiries as to what was happening, to the point where we even questioned the then board, which is now, the new board has been refusing to meet with us at all costs because they don't want to take responsibility for certain actions. And now it's been over 8 months that they've been in place and they don't want to engage. We've written them letters, we've engaged them at the public level, and every time they come up with excuses. They don't want to engage in terms of from a civil society as well as from mass movements in terms of explaining. But here is the situation. You have gross maladministration, you have gross fraud happening within the SAA airline, and then you have people that have been clearly identified as problem makers and people who are stealing from the airline. From Coleman Andrews' days, there was a lot of stealing. I mean, the man who was paid over 300 million package for 2 years to actually drive the same industry, the same airline, which was loss-making, to be paid a CEO 300 million. At the same time, his consulting company then was paid another 300 million in order to receive his package, for the work never been done, right? You have a situation whereby thereafter, there's been continued accumulating losses. When we entered into the fray and say, SAA, the buck stops here, we were then relegated to the new board, which currently refuses to even see us. So from a Transform RSA point of view, we have been very clear about some of the issues. We know the interests of people who are politically high level and who are elite and political elites in our society, who are currently benefiting from SAA and are making obscene amounts of money, who are not interested in making sure that SAA becomes a turned-around entity, that it becomes profitable. But their interest is not only that. They want to drive SAA towards the level of privatization so that they can take over the entity and then own it and then make profits out of it and then continue the looting as usual.
All right, just before we wrap up, a reminder to our viewers what we're trying to achieve. This is the second series or expose at what's going on at the South African Airways, and we're wanting to find out exactly who benefits from the chaos that is going on there. Now, if SAA only acted on these investigative reports, 2.3 billion rand of taxpayers' money could have been saved without necessarily affording SAA the bailout. Take a look at this.
Well, this is how the ENS report could have avoided the bailout. ENS identified areas of potential savings up to 766.4 million rand. ENS projected potential savings related to pilots 964.4 million rand. ENS classified irregular expenditure 705 million rand. SAA has 1.5 billion rand trapped abroad that is unable to repatriate. These alone could add up to 3.9 billion rand to SAA coffers.
Now, I mean, the pilots, while we're on the subject of salaries, with the reports also showing clearly that there's money that could be saved, let alone on the increases that staff members, particularly pilots, are enjoying. 2.3 million rand per pilot per annum.
An average, yes. How come do you have a state-owned company that pays a pilot more than a president of a state gets paid? 2.3 million minimum. I'm not even talking benefits and other allowances and packages and expenses and luxury lifestyles that the pilots enjoy while on board and on various trips and destinations. Why are we allowing this as a country?
Yeah, but how do we even arrive at these negotiations, though? Is it the mold being set, or is it something that was adopted maybe from the previous administration or regime? How do we even arrive at this particular situation?
I think that the negotiations were a long time ago, evergreen. You know, that's the key word. And who's going to give up? Are you going to give up your fancy bed in a fancy hotel in New York, close to close to all the tourist attractions, for one that's closer to the airport, that's more convenient for your rest days? For heaven's sake, you know, it's not as though you're there on holiday. So who's going to give up those when you can keep them, you know? Yeah,
but also the recycling, or rather constant changes in management and the board as well. What kind of changes has that affected, if any, as Amo?
Well, the constant change in management simply means this: nobody sits at the desk long enough to come to grips with all the issues to actually do anything about them. It appears that the person who's been there long enough to really have come down to it, to say, okay, you've got the 24 billion procurement spend, 98% goes to lily white companies. Now,
Africa Check actually went and checked that fact and said, no, it's not totally right. Yes, the 1.7% BEE empowered, that's true, but about 27% goes to either state-owned entities like AXA for landing fees and that, but it's more than 70% still goes lily white. Africa Check, it's there on the net, you'll find it. It says 70% of that 24 billion goes to white companies, full stop. You have allegations of Dudumieni came and made something about there must be a contract for fuel given to whoever. Long story cut short, basically she was reported to the CIPC. Now she's deemed a delinquent director. She misled the minister, long story. But the bottom line is this: 35% of operating cost of SAA is fuel. 2 companies are running those. Evergreen. 2015, that was 10 billion, fuel alone. Last year was about 7-8 billion. So you do the math and look at what is really happening. What I don't understand is SAA's primary business is to transport people from point A to point B. We look at the other structure of all the transport companies. They are within the Department of Transport, etc. Why is SAA being the baby that gets thrown out of the bathwater and then to wherever? It appears, because nothing has really changed in terms of structurally. The same has continued. From it moving from Transnet to public enterprises, same thing. From public enterprises to Treasury, same thing. It's just getting worse.
Yeah, but if we're sitting still with these reports not being tabled to the board and executive not having given their feedback, etc., there's now pressure to be submitted at least to the portfolio committee by the 21st of this month. Cecilia, I mean, for me, it's very difficult to even see how this will be concluded, including Minister of Finance. He did mention that, SAA is not problematic, it can be fixed. He seems more charitable than what you said.
That's what he said.
And he spoke of privatization. Is that the only route?
Well, they have this Seabury report, which is also nobody knows what the contents are. And it's finished, and that Seabury report apparently looks at the turnaround strategy. Again, let me just tell you, it's not the first; it's the 3rd turnaround strategy report that they've had. I think that Treasury needs to take responsibility and say we are in charge, or in some way or another. The board has been there for nearly a year now, so they should by now. I mean, I had a cynic once said to me, the reason that the state-owned enterprises can't have a board for more than 2 years, that after the 18 months or so they start understanding what is really going on, so they can fix it, and then they must immediately be removed. But I mean, I suppose it's a cynical view. But it is absolutely imperative that media, that the people that can keep up the pressure on SAA and not on SAA, on Treasury actually, because Treasury is the person that the juristic person or the financial person that actually is looking after SAA. Make sure that they look at these reports, implement them, come up with some smart decision making, and do it as quickly as possible.
Well, we're gonna fix SAA. I can tell you that for sure. At least one expose at a time. We're gonna have to leave it there with our esteemed panelist Cecilia Russell, is editor for special projects at ANN7. Adil Nchabileng is president of Transform RSA. Matthew Ramusi, South African Transport and Allied Workers Union National Sector Coordinator for Aviation. Zamo Madlala, spokesperson for Black Empowerment Foundation. And thanks indeed for joining us. We're back after this.